Okay, let's dive right into this one. It all starts with a story, about a king who was, well, let's just say he was a little cheap. He wanted to save a few coins, so he buys this super powerful fan on discount. The only catch? It had one major problem: no speed control. So he tasks his minister with fixing it, and that's where a simple problem gets a surprisingly clever and at first a very dangerous solution. And yeah, that panicked quote from the king, that's pretty much our starting point. The minister's solution, it worked, but it also almost set the entire palace on fire. So how can a fix be both right and so catastrophically wrong? Well, let's find out.
So, let's meet our main characters. On one side, you've got this miserly king who decided to cheap out on a fan regulator, and on the other, you have his ever-resourceful, if maybe a little misguided, minister, Gan Adore. And he's the one who's now got to figure out how to tame this gale-force wind in the royal chamber without spending any more money, of course.
And here's a fun little detail, a little bit of foreshadowing for you. The minister's name, Gan Adore, it literally translates to incomplete knowledge. This is a perfect hint about what's about to happen, because his solution, it's based on a principle that is technically correct, but he's missing the bigger, much, much hotter picture.
So, armed with his incomplete knowledge, Gan Adore gets to work. He knows the basic idea. To slow the fan down, you've got to reduce the electric current flowing to it. And the simplest, most straightforward way to do that? Just add some resistance. Resistance is just a material's natural tendency to get in the way of electricity. Now, his plan seems pretty logical, right? He just snips the fan's power cord and wires in a high-resistance coil he salvaged from an old toaster. The logic is simple. It comes straight from Ohm's law, that fundamental rule that connects current, voltage, and resistance. The idea is, if you increase the resistance in a circuit, the current has to decrease. Less current equals a slower fan. Easy peasy. Or so he thinks.
And you know what? At first, it totally works. The fan slows right down. But then, a brand new problem pops up. That toaster coil, which is now basically just a giant resistor, it starts glowing cherry red. It's radiating an insane amount of heat, and it actually starts to burn the king's expensive carpet. So the solution to one problem just created a way, way more dangerous one.
So the minister, trying to defend himself, is completely baffled. He's like, wait a minute, to reduce the current, you have to increase the resistance, right? And here's the thing. He's not wrong, but he's not entirely right either. And this, right here, sets up the core scientific question we are going to unpack.
This whole fiery mess brings us to the real hero of our story, and a much, much cooler way to solve this problem. Because thankfully for the king and his palace, there's a far more elegant solution out there. One that doesn't involve, setting things on fire.
So, that leads to the big question. Is there a way to do this? Can you actually control the flow of electricity, slow down a motor, without just wasting all that energy as dangerous heat? And the answer is a big, resounding yes. And this here really lays out the two different approaches perfectly. The minister's resistor, that's just a brute force method. It literally burns up electrical energy as heat to slow the current down. But a capacitor, now that's a whole lot smarter. It doesn't waste the energy, it manages it. It stores it and then releases it, all to control the current. And this isn't just about safety, it's about efficiency. It's about not wasting power.
Okay, so we've seen what works. Now, let's dig into how it works. We're going to get into the science, the actual principle that makes a capacitor the perfect tool for this job.
All right, let's break this down. So, in an AC, or alternating current circuit, that's the type of electricity we all have in our homes, where the current is constantly flipping direction, a capacitor is basically in this constant state of charging and then discharging. As it charges up, it builds its own voltage, and that voltage actually pushes back against the main supply voltage. This pushback is what limits the current. And the best part? It does it all without creating a bunch of heat, because it just gives that energy right back to the circuit on the very next cycle. It's kind of like a tiny, super fast rechargeable battery.
And this whole effect, this pushback, it has a cool name, capacitive reactance. You can think of it as a kind of smart resistance that's perfect for AC circuits. It gets in the way of the current, just like a normal resistor does, but, and this is the key, it does it without that wasteful and dangerous side effect of producing a ton of heat.
Okay, so let's bring all this science back to our original problem. How does this whole principle of capacitive reactance actually work inside that fan speed controller you probably have on your wall at home right now?
Now, you might be thinking, hang on a second. If this reactance thing depends on the AC frequency, how can we possibly use it when the power coming from our walls is at a fixed frequency like 50 or 60 hertz? It's not like we can just call up the power company and ask them to change it for us, right?
Well, here's the brilliant part. If you can't change the frequency, you change the other variable in the equation. You change the capacitance. And that, right there, is the elegant secret behind all modern, efficient fan regulators.
So inside that little box on your wall, there's actually a series of different-sized capacitors. When you turn that knob to pick a new speed, what you're really doing is switching to a different capacitor, or maybe even a combination of them. This changes the total capacitance in the circuit. That, in turn, changes the capacitive reactance. And boom, you get precise control over your fan speed. No heat, no fire, just cool, efficient control.
And so our story wraps up with the king finally getting the science behind it all. He sends his minister, Gyan Adure, back to the market with a new, much safer mission. But of course, being the cheap king that he is, he still has to add that last little command. I guess some things never change, huh?
So there we have it. We've replaced some incomplete knowledge with a much fuller picture of how this stuff actually works. But there's one last little piece to this puzzle that I want to leave you with.
So it turns out those modern capacitor-based regulators, they actually still have resistors in them. They're just used in a very, very different way. So why on earth would an engineer add a resistor back into this cool, efficient circuit? It's actually a fantastic little safety feature. What do you think it does? I'd love to hear your theories.